We are back here with Isabel going through her burnout journey fundamentally and trying to get on the other side of it and running an incredible practice, dealing with everyone's challenges, helping people with their mental health and really sacrificing your own in the process. And so you're on the road to recovery from a self-care perspective. You're seeing natural health practitioners, things like chiropractors. You talked about the nervous system, having, someone who's seen a chiropractor a lot and really appreciate and love what the work that chiropractors do. There's a lot of impact in the nervous system that's all tied into there. Again, no, I'm not a medical professional, but I can certainly just think of my own circumstances. And you started to see improvements, rebuilding that cortisol and the ability to take on challenges again. But it was an extended period. So how did you find your way to get all the way through that experience? You had this year of kind of being free and liberated for yourself and being alone again and finding yourself to some degree. How was it actually going through that experience and trying to come through on the other side?
Yeah. Well, it's really when I created I I'm a one of the things that I am is I love research. I love research. So I really just got so curious because I started talking to other women, and almost every woman that I knew was totally stressed out. The successful, high achieving women that I knew were totally stressed out. And and I remember that wanting, like, okay, I want to interview women who've had success without burnout. And I couldn't find anybody, literally. Like I knew nobody. And so one of the things I started to do was to study wellness and well-being. When you think about positive psychology with Dr. Martin Seligman began like not only like 10 years ago, before in psychology, they only studied disease, right?
Mm,
And then he introduced the concept of positive psychology. What can we do? Not just how do we combat disease. And so I started studying stress and stress response and how do we get out of stress. And I brought together neuroscience and psychology and spirituality. And so I started living and practicing this methodology, which I now teach all over the world. That was like, well, how do I self-regulate, not just long term, right? Like taking care of myself and working out and getting massages and getting the right nutrition, but also how do I regulate myself in the moment when I realize that I'm heading into the stress response and I want to stop myself before I get too far into that stress response and get myself depleted. Because when you have adrenal exhaustion, your bandwidth, your window of tolerance of
mm,
I would work 2 hours and then I'd be wiped out. Like my bucket of energy. I remember the doctor telling me to, like, it's like a battery. My battery emptied out really fast. You know when you have an older computer and the battery empties out really fast? So I had to rebuild my battery both with long-term foundational changes
mm.
and short-term all the time, learning to catch myself. I'd be working 2 hours and could I track when I started to get tired as opposed to waiting till I was all the way depleted and empty
Mm.
and stop and maybe take a walk or have a break? Like, so I really learned to track myself in the moment and in the long run. And that's what this methodology is. It teaches you to track yourself in the moment so you can make pivots before you get into crisis. And how do we take care of ourselves foundationally as well? I didn't know that's where I was going to go, but actually, I hope that's a good answer for you.
Well, it sounds like, with the methodology that you've worked with yourself on and started to really, I guess, dial in the framework of to turn it into something that you can make it recur with other people. You could make it become
Yes.
systematic in an approach. It sounds like there's a fundamental aspect of habits and just getting really clear on the practice of initiating a new habit to be able to see that awareness. I think about the elastic band trick, when you put an elastic band on your wrist and then every time you recognize that you're trying to not put money in the swear jar and break a habit, or you want to, do something where you're changing a certain word that you use on a regular basis, and you'd snap your wrist with an elastic to kind of remind yourself every time you catch yourself doing it. Things like that that kind of help to bring awareness, like you say, getting clear on the awareness of this before something happens, or right at the point where it's happening,
Right.
so you could like, oh, here's a way that I can kind of change mentally. And the idea of the elastic is simply to create a physical response,
Pattern interrupt,
pattern
yes.
interrupt. And so that seems like to me is a big component of the work that you're doing. And I might be wrong there, but maybe you can expand
I
on that.
can't believe you just used that, and nobody's ever done this in podcast interviews. So literally, my I I created my company. My company's name is Choice Point, and my methodology is called the Choice Point methodology because when I was struggling with my eating disorder, I would study every beautiful therapy, self development, mindfulness, spiritual book in the world. They call it shelf development. Somebody told me the name shelf development. Like, it's so good because, like, at 10 o'clock at night, I feel so inspired. Tomorrow, I'm going to be so healthy. I'm going to do all my good habits. And then, 4 o'clock in the afternoon would strike, right? After a day filled with stress, and bam, I would act out the painful habit. And I read this book by Tara Bennett Goldman, who's Daniel Goleman's wife. Daniel Goleman created the term emotional intelligence. And she wrote a book where she talks about this choice point. And this choice point is this moment between the impulse and the action. We get the impulse
Mm.
to do a habit, and there's only a quarter second from the time we have the impulse to the time we do it. And what she said is, in that choice point moment, if you can expand it, is where you can change your life, because instead of yelling at your partner, you take a breath. Instead of going to binge on ice cream, you pause and you go take a walk. And I looked around to see what is out there in the world to help at that moment of choice point. And guess what it was? Rubber bands, like snapping ourselves, or like maybe mala beads. There was nothing out there. So if you look at my business plan in 2005, my commitment was to create products and services to help people at that moment of choice. And that's literally what all my work is like, how do I help people expand that moment of choice so they can pick constructive, life supportive habits instead of destructive, life depleting habits. So I love that you brought that up, because I want to have a way that's not painful to create that pattern interrupt. And that's what the methodology is.
And so it's basically like Neo in the Matrix slowing down to see the bullets coming and dodging them is what you're creating, that moment in time where you can see the bullets coming at you that you yourself likely created.
So that should be my new logo. I love that.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
fantastic.
because we can expand time, right? They say you have a 7-year-old daughter. They say that adolescents have only 1/64th of a second from the impulse to the action. So learning to expand that. And so my methodology has 3 steps to help you stop, slow down, and breathe, and then choose another habit. Like, that's the whole point of the methodology is, how do we expand that choice point? And it changes everything, because our life is made of a series of choices. Like, that's what we do every day. Do I choose to work? Do I choose to go take all the time?
And it reminds me of a program I did many, many years ago with a profiler out of Edmonton, Alberta. His name was Blair Dunkley. Fascinating program, and he talked about a behavior chart, basically, where you go through like a behavioral loop, and you kind of just it brings you into this repetitive pattern. But as soon as you can evaluate the behavior, creating that space time like you talked about, now you can choose to make a slightly adjustable different item, and so then you still have a loop, but the loop is now moved over. It's moved to a
The
different space, and you're kind of moving this behavioral loop over in time to a place where you want the behavior to actually be.
I love that. Yeah. The the methodology has a formula that says awareness plus action equals transformation. So when you are talking about is the awareness, so that's the first thing I teach is like, and you've brought it up a couple times in the last few minutes. We first have to become aware, right? And so I teach signals like I was working this morning and had been working since 6. And so I started noticing signals, like I was starting to get foggy. I was
Mm.
starting to want to go get something to eat, but because like I know that place. It's not because I'm hungry. It's I really want a break. Like I started noticing I was getting frustrated when the cat was coming to me. So I'm like, oh, I'm starting to get into the stress response. And so I actually stopped my work and took care of myself. But you first have to begin with awareness and then take the action. And that's what it sounds like this guy was talking about. Aware, and then do the little tweak, and then do the action. And that changes everything when we do that, even if they're minor shifts that we're doing.
So, what are a couple of, I guess, commonalities or some regular things that you might see with people who are starting this process? And what are some of the the high level list of things that are these types of stress response awareness signals that people can really start to pay attention to give them that, oh, hey, this is happening to me, this is happening to me, now I can start to make a different behavior. You mentioned a couple very quickly. You're frustrated with the cat, getting a little bit fidgety, feeling tired. So those are a few of them. What are a couple other ones that people who are viewing this maybe should recognize and take some notes on?
Yeah, I love that. So I have the list of physical, emotional, mental, and relational signals. So I'll pick a couple just from each list. So one is physical. You might notice yourself being more tense. You might notice your jaw. A lot of us tighten our jaw. I start speaking faster and louder when I'm like that. Heart rate. Some people really notice their heart rate going faster. Emotionally, you might notice a sense of anxiety, right? If you do this chronically, you can go into depression. Um, you are reactive, you get
Mm,
frustrated, impatient more easily. Mentally, you worry, you ruminate, you can't let go of certain thoughts, and because you're looping, because your body's thinking you're in danger. So it's like, what do I do? What do I do? So this stress, this anxiety and rumination is all part
mm,
of that. And then relationally, you can only find what's wrong. Like the biggest thing that you're in that stress response is you can only see what's wrong either with yourself or others or the world. And so, with your partner, you don't listen, you're defensive, you're irritable, you want to be right, right? That's one of the big trigger knowing like that you are in the stress response is you want to be right. And you're really unkind and you're really thinking only about yourself. It's not a collaborative, you're competitive with others instead of being collaborative. And then often habits, it's like you are wanting to act out painful habits, impulsive habits. That's another sign. Like you suddenly want to like drink your second glass of wine, or you want to finish the cookies in your pantry. Like it's like you feeling this like this place like gut that can let you know.
wow, those are incredible. And I think many people will resonate with some of those things you identified. And so, with that in mind, we're going to talk more about what to do when these feelings come up and you get aware of them when we come back after this incredible commercial break.